So I am Elaine Williams. I am the director of RVA Thrives with Virginia Community Voice. I was raised by my great-grandmother, and we're from Richmond, and I watched her example of community and building community within our home and the way that she cared for myself, my siblings, and relatives, and the way she cared for her community. And I watched how that was a tradition passed down throughout my family. And I recognize now that that was a microcosm of what our Richmond community could be. And there were challenges that stood in the way from us becoming that. And watching the way that there were things that may have happened or things we didn't have growing up, and she tried to mitigate or bring resources to make those things happen so that we weren't without, even though there were challenges that prevented her from fully being able to do that. And then seeing other relatives take on that mantle to be the community builder and nurturer really inspired me. And also remembering a conversation that we had when I was 7 in the kitchen, and she said to me, I asked her, why are things the way they are for us, which are for Black folks? And she said, well, this is how things have always been, but it doesn't have to be how it always will be. And that for me was like this call within my spirit to do something differently. And that really sparked me to want to pursue justice and equity for Black folks in our community. One of the harmful inequities we see within our community is the devaluing of Black lives and Black livelihood. This notion that if you have Black or brown skin, that you're less than equal than human. And then you see the inequities that we have around housing and education and those things. And because of the devaluing and because of the issue of racism, we have the Richmond that we have today, right? And I believe that the more that we work towards a just Richmond, it feels like oppression and racism shows up differently in a different shade, in a different way. But the root is still the same. And so until we recognize, I was thinking about this the other day when I was walking in a predominantly white community and I saw Black Lives Matter signs in the yard. And it made me start to question, when in life have we ever had to put White Lives Matter up? Why do we have to say a sign if it's something innately that should be true? And so when we start to value Black lives and see them as, not them, but see me as human, then we'll begin to really work towards a just and more equitable community. And so I believe that's one of the biggest issues we have in our community. It's a quote by Alice Walker that talks about the worst thing that society could have done for Black people is making them feel like that they don't have power, right? And so how do we unearth that narrative that we have been taught about ourselves, that we can't create the change and that we can't create a more equitable community? And so my work is, how do I help folks realize that we can, and also ensure that the resources and connections are there to implement what it takes to actually create that community. I get to actually call out white supremacy, and it's exhausting, right? And it's also fun, to sit in, to be invited to tables and have a sense of privilege, to come into spaces and say this is not okay. To hopefully create a more just table, or also learn the strategies of that table to create one that is more equitable for folks who share identities or who looks like me. So I would say equitable Richmond would look like a Richmond that all people are valued and that everyone has access to the resources, may it be financial, whatever that resource is defined by that person will have access to have a thriving life that allows them to reach their fullest potential. And there isn't barriers that prevent people to have access to legacy and wealth that will be for generations to come. When we actually not just speak equity, but actually really start to take apart that definition and understand that it's not just what I need, but it's what every individual person needs to thrive, and ensure that they have those things, then we'll have a community that's more equitable. And I just think like the image that comes to mind is a cookout. I don't know why, but like a black cookout is what I think equity looks like, right? Like things may not always be we may not be to the place of liberation, yet we're a step closer because everyone has what they need to thrive. And that's what I think, what I envision for Richmond to be an equitable city. We are talking about the unhealed and the wounds of Richmond. And we're not creating spaces or putting money behind how to heal Richmond. And not to heal with Richmond from a top-down approach, but how do we think about unorthodox ways to bring and embrace healing, particularly for Black folks? And how do we create avenues where we can have reinvestment into practices and organizations that are doing healing work that can really get at the root of some of these inequities and the harm that has been passed down from generations through trauma and the experiences of a day-to-day life as a Black person in our community. So I believe that reinvestment and resources to heal, as well as in community work, community healing rooted work, is something that can be done, a strategy that can be done to really get at the root of what is happening that prevents a lot of our folks from being able to get beyond their trauma. And as well as investing in Black-led organizations. We are a minority in Richmond. It's true, right? And the funding goes to predominantly white institutions, yet they're perpetuators of the harm that's happening within in our community. And so how do we redistribute that money into the spaces that are investing in the folks who are impacted by these issues? In addition to that, I believe there should be more opportunities for young people to be equipped to be in positions of power. Like I see that in our system, there's so many folks who are from generations and generations and generations before us, but yet there's not opportunities to pass the torch into younger generations to transform how the institutions are making decisions. And I would want to see ways that is done equitably and rooted in community and not just let me come in and teach you how to uphold white supremacy. The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? When I was unpacking that book, to learn that when the oppressed only knows the strategies and the ways of being of the oppressor, it's easy to see that as a way of showing up and to hold power, right? Like we finally got a seat at the table. We're finally in the house. Like how do we sustain ourselves? And sometimes if you're not in a place to be checked or have people around you to say like, hey, that upholds the system that we're trying to eradicate, it's easy to fall in line. And I also think that the other side of that is if you have a rotten tree and you know that in order for you to actually be able to make it better or actually help that tree from falling on your house, you have to cut it at the root. Why would you keep putting things on top? Like, why would you keep pruning the top of it? The root is still rotten. And so when we think about the systems that have been created in our community, in our world, they've been here over decades. And a part of those systems is to uphold oppression. So even if you reform or change the people in power, we still have the root. Until we unearth the root and get rid of the root, we are only going to cause more harm and not be able to get to an equitable Richmond because we have the same formula at play to create change. We as Black folks know what we need to thrive, yet we're not brought to the table in intentional and meaningful ways to actually implement those solutions. It's what you want to hear, and we still benefit from what you are saying is harmful, so we're not going to actually do anything about that. We'll just band-aid and give you something for the moment to pacify you, right? And so how do we ensure that we are bringing communities to the table and allowing them to help us imagine? I think it takes radical imagination to think about what just Richmond would look like that goes beyond what we are normed to see. Because I think equity is something that we all strive for, but it's hard for us to see it because it's not our normal. And so I think it's going to take radical imagination and also unearthing what our root is, which is oppression and white supremacy. My disclaimer is that I believe collective healing is powerful when folks look like me are working to heal together. right? Like, I'm not saying that there's not space for white folks to come into community and heal, but I think we need spaces that are black caucuses, where we can work on healing ourselves and white folks work on healing themselves, and then we come together. But I think collective healing of the black community is what's necessary. And also, like, I say black community because that's my identity, and I can't speak what healing looks like for any other community, but I think healing is a big piece right now for me to achieve racial equity, right? Because it's so much deeper than just the moment of white supremacy, but it's how the ripple effects that our community is impacted by every single day that moves beyond just white folks doing us wrong. Yeah, so I would say healing is the biggest thing that has been really heavily on my heart and mind that I hope our community can really start to dig into.